Late autumn, 1944. The war in Europe has begun to tilt, but at a heavy cost. A captured German airfield somewhere in Belgium lies silent now, the smoke of recent battle drifting across the runway. American soldiers wander among wrecked trucks and burned-out aircraft, their boots crunching over spent shell casings. The wind carries the distant rumble of artillery, but for the moment, there's an uneasy calm. And then, laughter. A small group of GIs gathers around a strange, box-shaped car, painted in faded sand yellow. It looks more like a toy than a machine of war. One soldier lifts the hood. No radiator, no pipes, just an air-cooled engine barely the size of a backpack. 25 horsepower? One laughs. My lawnmower's got more muscle than that. The Kübelwagen sputters to life with a dry, metallic cough. Its tiny engine hums against the vast silence of the battlefield, an odd symbol of German practicality in a world obsessed with power and destruction. For the men watching, it's a curiosity. For historians, it's a window into the mind of German engineering. And for the war itself, it's a reminder that sometimes simplicity outlasts strength. By the closing months of 1944, the balance of the war in Europe had shifted dramatically. The Allied advance had broken through the Normandy hedgerows, sweeping east toward the German frontier. American and British divisions now pushed deep into occupied territory, while the Soviet armies surged from the east. Yet behind the collapsing front lines, another quiet battle had already been lost. The battle of production. Germany, once confident in its industrial might, was now suffocating under the relentless weight of Allied bombing and material shortages. Steel, rubber, and fuel had become luxuries. Even the mighty panzer divisions, symbols of Nazi power, often stood immobilized for lack of parts or gasoline. Every resource had to be stretched, every vehicle repurposed, every innovation forced to serve both simplicity and function. It was in this atmosphere of scarcity and ingenuity that one of the war's most unexpected machines was born. The Volkswagen Kübelwagen, or Type 82. Its story began years earlier, before the outbreak of war, in the mind of engineer Ferdinand Porsche. Porsche had been tasked by Adolf Hitler in the 1930s to design a people's car, the Volkswagen Beetle, a simple, affordable vehicle for the average German family. But when war came in 1939, Porsche's peaceful vision was repurposed for the battlefield. The Beetle's air-cooled engine, light chassis, and simple suspension made it an ideal platform for adaptation. The German army needed a vehicle that could move soldiers, dispatch riders, and supplies across rough terrain without heavy maintenance. The result was the Kübelwagen, a military evolution of the Beetle's concept. Built by Volkswagen under the supervision of Porsche's team, it was a masterpiece of minimalism. No radiator, no complex cooling system, no unnecessary weight. Its engine delivered only 25 horsepower, but the vehicle weighed less than half of an American Jeep. Its thin steel body and reinforced floor pan gave it surprising durability while keeping production costs low. As Germany mobilized for total war, the Kübelwagen rolled out of factories across the Reich, destined for every front, from the sands of North Africa to the snows of the Eastern Front. It became the German soldier's everyday companion, as common to the Wehrmacht as the Jeep would become to the Allies. Yet, like everything else in the Third Reich's war machine, it carried a paradox, a product of a regime that sought domination, but engineered with efficiency and restraint. And soon, its path would cross with its American counterpart, in a contest of philosophy as much as engineering. Across the Atlantic, a very different machine had been born, the Willys Jeep. Developed in record time in 1940, the Jeep embodied American industrial speed and adaptability. With its 60 horsepower, four-cylinder engine, four-wheel drive, and robust frame, it could climb hills, ford streams, and haul supplies through mud or snow. It wasn't elegant, but it was indestructible and produced in staggering numbers. By 1944, over 500,000 Jeeps had been built. The Kübelwagen, by comparison, numbered barely 50,000. Where the American vehicle was mass-produced steel and torque, the German one was light, efficient, and scarce. Two sides of the same industrial coin. On the battlefield, their meeting was inevitable. In North Africa, Allied troops captured the first Kübelwagens abandoned in the desert by Rommel's Afrika Korps. Reports described a strange, almost delicate vehicle that seemed better suited for city roads than sand dunes. But the soldiers soon realized otherwise. Its lightweight and air-cooled engine gave it a quiet advantage in the heat. Unlike many Allied vehicles, it never overheated. It didn't need water, and its low center of gravity allowed it to glide over soft sand where heavier trucks bogged down. In the east, it endured the brutal cold where engines froze solid overnight. German mechanics marveled at its resilience. Soldiers joked that even when their tanks failed, the little Volkswagen would still start. When American troops encountered it in Western Europe, their first reaction was disbelief. "This is what the Germans drive?" One report mocked. Compared to the rugged Jeep, the Kübelwagen looked like a child's toy. Its thin metal panels, lack of doors, and low power seemed laughable, until they drove it. Tests quickly revealed that the German car could match much of the Jeep's mobility with half the engine power and fuel consumption. It floated over mud, climbed slopes with surprising ease, and handled with precision thanks to its torsion bar suspension. Its only weakness was in deep snow or heavy mud, where the lack of four-wheel drive limited traction. To the Americans, it was a curiosity, a symbol of the enemy's different way of thinking. To the Germans, it was a triumph of design born from necessity. And as the war neared its end, the Kübelwagen stood as one of the few vehicles that had served faithfully from the first shots of 1939 to the ruins of 1945. Soon, its captured examples would find their way into Allied workshops, where soldiers, laughing and impressed in equal measure, would put it to the ultimate test. Kübelwagen's genius began where others saw limitation. At the heart of its design was the air-cooled flat-four engine, the same mechanical soul that powered the early Volkswagen Beetle. This single decision set it apart. While most military vehicles relied on water-cooled systems vulnerable to freezing, overheating, and leaks, the Kübelwagen required none. Its engine could run in the deserts of North Africa or the frozen plains of Russia with equal ease. It needed no radiator, no antifreeze, no delicate plumbing. Its simplicity was its armor. The car weighed barely 700 kilograms, less than half the Jeep's mass. This meant its 25-horsepower engine could still move it over rough terrain, consuming far less fuel, a priceless advantage for an army constantly short on supplies. Its transmission and differential were minimal yet robust, and its flat underbody allowed it to skid across mud and snow without getting trapped. German engineers didn't design it to dominate. They designed it to endure. Each bolt, hinge, and lever could be replaced in the field with a wrench and wire. Even the seats were removable to lighten the load. There was no excess metal, no decorative trim, only function. But engineering alone didn't win battles. On the tactical level, the Kübelwagen had clear boundaries. Its rear-wheel drive limited traction in deep mud or steep inclines, where the Jeep's four-wheel drive excelled. German troops sometimes had to push it out of bogged ground, a task made easier only because it was so light. Still, in most terrain, its stability, ground clearance, and power-to-weight ratio surprised even its critics. To Allied observers, it was an odd contradiction. The same nation that built heavy Tigers and Panthers had also produced this paper-thin car. Its presence on the battlefield puzzled and amused them. Yet, the more they examined it, the more respect it earned. They saw in it not weakness, but discipline, an economy of design that reflected the German way of war. efficient, precise, and unyielding even under strain. Captured soldiers spoke of it fondly, often calling it the beetle in uniform. Allied engineers, testing it later, would note that the Kübelwagen represented not arrogance, but adaptation, the quiet genius of doing more with less. And as laughter turned to curiosity, soldiers began to see it as more than an enemy's car. It was a mirror, revealing how differently two great industrial powers approached the same problem. When American soldiers first got their hands on a captured Kübelwagen, the encounter was almost comedic. They joked, posed for photos, and exaggerated its size, calling it the little German bug. Yet, behind the humor lay genuine fascination. Soldiers who had spent months fighting the Wehrmacht were suddenly examining a piece of their enemy's everyday life. Something personal, tangible, and strangely human. They climbed inside, turned the small ignition key, and listened as the 25-horsepower engine coughed to life. Its tone was soft, almost friendly. Nothing like the roar of tanks or the thundering jeeps they drove daily. It bounced lightly over uneven ground, its suspension flexing like a living thing. The more they drove it, the more they laughed. Not in mockery, but surprise. There was charm in its simplicity. The Kübelwagen embodied a cultural contrast that ran deeper than steel. Where American industry thrived on abundance, power, production, and manpower, German design was built on precision and conservation. Each component existed for a reason, no more, no less. It was the same philosophy that shaped German optics, small arms, and even field radios, perfection through economy. To American eyes, this frugality looked odd. To German engineers, it was logic under fire. They built not for comfort, but for survival. And that philosophy extended beyond machinery. It was visible in the soldiers themselves, methodical, disciplined, trained to adapt. Comparing the Kübelwagen and the Jeep became more than an engineering exercise. It was a study in wartime ideology. The Jeep represented mobility through might, a powerful engine, strong axles, and the capacity to haul men, weapons, and even tow artillery. It was the embodiment of American industrial muscle, fast, capable, and endlessly replaceable. The Kübelwagen represented movement through efficiency, lightweight, minimal fuel, and mechanical simplicity. It couldn't carry as much or climb as far, but it didn't need to. It performed its duty with elegance and restraint. After the war, military analysts studying both vehicles concluded that each reflected its creator's mindset. The Jeep was the product of a nation that could afford to build 1,000 machines to win one battle. The Kübelwagen was born from a country that had to make one machine fight 1,000 battles. And so, what began as soldiers' laughter over a tiny 25-horsepower car gradually turned into respect, even admiration, for the quiet intelligence of their defeated enemy. From that irony, a truth emerged. In war, power wins battles, but efficiency wins endurance. Winter 1944, somewhere on the edge of the Ardennes. The air was sharp, the trees heavy with frost, and the earth frozen solid beneath the boots of American infantrymen. The war here was brutal and unpredictable, but at this moment, there was laughter echoing across the camp. Parked between half-tracks and jeeps sat a captured German Kübelwagen. Its tan paint faded, Wehrmacht insignia hastily scratched out. A group of GIs circled it like mechanics at a circus act. One kicked the tire. Another leaned inside, studying the bare-bones dashboard. Just a speedometer, a fuel gauge, and a few metal levers. Hell, my washing machine's got more switches, one of them joked. Drawing laughter, they decided to take it for a spin. Private Miller, the camp's best driver, slid behind the wheel, twisting the small ignition key. The flat four-engine coughed, sputtered, then caught with a steady hum. Quiet, steady, efficient. No smoke, no smell of fuel. just a clean, rhythmic pulse. He eased it forward, and the car rolled effortlessly over the packed snow. The soldiers followed, laughing as it bounced lightly over frozen ruts. It looked fragile, yet it didn't flinch. They pushed it harder, up a hill, through slush, across a field dotted with shell holes. The little vehicle glided, its rear wheels spinning but never bogging down. Its torsion bar suspension absorbed each bump gracefully, keeping the ride stable even without the weight or muscle of a Jeep. 25 horsepower, my foot, Miller shouted over the wind, grinning. Feels like more. At just over 50 miles per hour on flat ground, the Kübelwagen wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. It was smooth, balanced, and astonishingly light. When Miller cut the engine, two soldiers easily lifted the rear bumper off the ground, laughing in disbelief. For men used to roaring American machines, this was something different. A car that whispered instead of shouted. It looked weak, but in its quiet endurance, they recognized something rare: craftsmanship without waste. By the end of the test, the jokes had stopped. The Kübelwagen had earned a measure of respect, not through power, but through purpose, and when the soldiers parked it beside their Jeeps, they looked at it differently, not as an enemy's relic, but as a mechanical riddle solved with humility and intelligence. The Americans sent their notes and impressions up the chain of command. Within weeks, the Kübelwagen was being examined by Allied technical units. That's when the laughter turned to analysis. When Allied technicians began studying captured Kübelwagens in detail, the tone shifted from amusement to genuine admiration. At ordnance depots across France and England, engineers disassembled the vehicles bolt by bolt, documenting each component with precision. What they found defied expectations. The Kübelwagen's air-cooled engine was remarkably simple. No water pump, radiator, or complex hoses. It used just 4 cylinders, horizontally opposed, cooled entirely by airflow through a ducted fan. This meant it could operate in extreme cold without freezing and in desert heat without boiling over. It was maintenance-free compared to most Allied vehicles. Its suspension system, built on torsion bars instead of leaf springs, distributed weight evenly and gave the vehicle surprising agility. The body panels were thin, but intelligently shaped to resist bending. Even its flat undercarriage, initially mocked by Allied drivers, served a purpose. It allowed the car to slide over mud and snow rather than sink into it. Technicians noted its uncanny fuel economy. Where a Jeep could consume a gallon of fuel every 10 miles, the Kübelwagen could travel nearly 30. For a resource-starved army like Germany's, this was no small achievement. Reports circulated among Allied command units. One British evaluation in 1945 described it as an example of intelligent engineering, economical and well-suited to the needs of its operators. Another American field note commented, "Though limited in power, the German vehicle exhibits a remarkable balance of efficiency and performance." Its weaknesses were noted too: no four-wheel drive, limited towing power, and poor handling in deep mud. But these flaws were secondary to the insight it offered. A machine born not from abundance, but from adaptation. The Kübelwagen had proven something profound about the German approach to warfare. While Nazi leadership demanded monumental weapons, the Tigers, the V2s, the wonder weapons, their engineers quietly excelled at minimalism. The Kübelwagen embodied that contradiction: efficient, practical, and utterly reliable, even as the empire that built it was collapsing. For the Allies, the lesson was clear. Raw power had carried them across Europe, but this small, unassuming car revealed a subtler form of genius: engineering discipline under pressure. In workshops from London to Detroit, military designers studied its features. Its air-cooled layout and torsion bar suspension would later influence post-war vehicles, including the reborn Volkswagen Beetle and even Allied light transport concepts. The little 25-horsepower car that once drew laughter had quietly earned its place in military history. It was proof that innovation doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums softly through the snow. By the spring of 1945, the war in Europe was over, and Germany lay in ruins. Its factories were gutted, its cities reduced to ash, and its people caught between despair and survival. Yet amid the destruction, Allied occupation forces began cataloging and studying the technological remains of the Reich. The aircraft, tanks, weapons, and vehicles that had powered 6 years of total war. Among the many machines collected for evaluation were hundreds of Kübelwagens, parked in fields, abandoned along roads, or seized from military depots. What had once been a common sight on every German front now became a subject of curiosity in Allied engineering circles. British and American ordnance teams examined them carefully. Reports highlighted not only their clever simplicity, but their consistency. Even models produced in the chaotic final years of the war, when materials were scarce and labor conditions desperate, retained the same mechanical reliability as early versions. That kind of production discipline impressed even the most skeptical engineers. Soon, the Kübelwagen's civilian sibling, the Volkswagen Beetle, would play a role in rebuilding Germany itself. When British occupation authorities took control of the bombed-out Volkswagen plant at Wolfsburg, many believed it should be dismantled. It had been built under Nazi direction. Its founder, Ferdinand Porsche, was under arrest. Yet a few British officers saw something more. A factory capable of producing simple, affordable cars for a broken nation. Major Ivan Hurst of the British Army was among them. Walking through the half-destroyed plant in 1945, he found surviving Kübelwagens and Beetle prototypes scattered among the rubble. He ordered them repaired, not as war machines, but as transport for Allied units. The little cars worked flawlessly. Under Hurst's guidance, production restarted. First for military use, then for civilians. By 1946, the first Volkswagen Beetles rolled out of the same lines that had once built the Kübelwagen. What had been a symbol of militarized efficiency was reborn as a vehicle of peace and recovery. In a quiet irony, the design born for conquest now helped rebuild the very country that had fallen. And the lessons learned from its military past, lightness, efficiency, and reliability, became the foundation of Volkswagen's future. As Europe recovered, the Kübelwagen's legacy rippled far beyond Germany. Its engineering principles influenced not just post-war civilian cars, but military thinking across the world. The Allies had laughed at its 25 horsepower. But they remembered how far it could go on a thimble of fuel, and how effortlessly it performed in terrain that swallowed heavier vehicles. In the United States, returning engineers and automotive experts quietly noted its innovations. Air-cooled engines, torsion bar suspension, and lightweight chassis design found their way into various post-war experiments. Though the Jeep remained the symbol of Allied mobility, the Kübelwagen's DNA lived on in subtler ways, in compact transport vehicles, small European cars, and even the reborn Volkswagen Beetle that became a global icon of simplicity. By the 1950s, Volkswagen was thriving. The Beetle, sharing much of its mechanical heart with the wartime Kübelwagen, became a miracle of peacetime production, reliable, affordable, and loved across continents. Its design philosophy, less power, more purpose, resonated with a generation weary of waste and war. In the 1960s, the Kübelwagen's military spirit was revived once more in a new form. The Volkswagen Type 181, known to the public as the Thing. Built for NATO forces and later sold to civilians, it echoed the same utilitarian lines, air-cooled engine, and lightweight construction of its predecessor. It wasn't fast or glamorous, but it was unmistakably practical. A direct descendant of the little car that had carried Wehrmacht officers across Europe decades earlier. Even within Allied design circles, respect endured. The Kübelwagen had revealed a truth about wartime innovation: that necessity breeds efficiency, and that great engineering often emerges not from abundance, but from constraint. Historians and automotive experts later called it a triumph of mechanical logic. It was a vehicle that did not rely on luxury or brute strength, but on a deep understanding of what was enough. In museums today, restored Kübelwagens sit beside Jeeps, two opposites in philosophy, yet equals in legacy. One was born from industrial might, the other from mechanical purity, and in that contrast lies their shared victory. Both proved that the power to move men through war, and later, through peace, came not only from engines, but from ideas. In the great storm of World War II, a conflict defined by tanks that shook the earth and bombers that blotted out the sun, the little Kübelwagen seemed almost laughable, a 25-horsepower toy rolling through a world of monsters. And yet, it endured. The same American soldiers who first mocked it would later nod with quiet respect, realizing that beneath its flimsy looks was a marvel of logic and restraint, a machine that did exactly what it was meant to do, and nothing more. It never pretended to be powerful. It simply worked. In desert heat, Russian cold, and European mud. When the guns finally fell silent, the lessons it carried outlived the war. Ferdinand Porsche's simple principles: air-cooled reliability, mechanical efficiency, human-centered design, would drive the rebirth of a nation and give rise to one of history's most iconic civilian cars, the Volkswagen Beetle. So perhaps the Kübelwagen's true victory wasn't on any battlefield, but in the quiet endurance of its philosophy. It stood as a humble reminder that even in an age of destruction, the purest kind of engineering is not about domination, but about understanding the balance between necessity and ingenuity. A car born for war that helped inspire peace. From laughter came respect, and from simplicity, a legacy.